Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so we were supposed to have a guest on tonight, Bess Godin, the Steampunk Parliament. Unfortunately, she's not available. Something came up at the last minute, so I'm going to be going solo. Tonight we're going to talk about psychics, astrology, fortune telling, all those other happy things out there that people get into. Um, how real is it? How people fake it? All that kind of thing. Um, I also want to make a couple quick announcements. First, I want to remind y'all that I'm saying y'all, and I'm not a Texan, but at any rate, on March, or excuse me, what am I saying? May 8th, we will be starting classes here in New Jersey that on the paranormal. And that'll be bi-weekly in May. There'll be $20 a class. It's going to be in Bordentown, New Jersey. If you live in the area and you're interested, please give me an email. You can message me through the channel even. Also, I have a fairly exciting piece of news, at least for gamers like myself who've been around for a while. Um, there's an old video game. You can find it on Steam. You can find it on Good Old Games. Um, it's fairly well known in general, just because it's the very first CD-ROM game actually, and it's called The Seventh Guest. Seventh Guest is a horror game that takes place in a haunted house with a bunch of puzzles, mysteries. It's a pretty cool game. I've always been a fan of it. Um, at any rate, there's a new TV show that they're working on now, from a company called Darkstone Entertainment, based on The Seventh Guest. And I've spoken with the creator of the series, John Johnson, who's kindly agreed to give us an interview. Looks like we're tentatively shooting for the 27th. I gotta double check and confirm with him, but it's looking pretty good. You can find the teaser for it here on YouTube. It looks pretty freaking cool. And yeah, it should be a very cool interview. I suggest looking up the teaser and checking out the video game sometime if you have a chance. You can find Let's Plays of it here on YouTube if you want to check it out instead of spending the money. But I would say it's worth laying down the money to buy an actual copy. It's not terribly expensive. Um, and the series, really looking forward to the series. It looks pretty cool. So, all of that said, let's talk about psychics. Yeah. So this discussion actually grew out of a conversation I had with a friend of mine on Facebook. But she was talking about Mercury being in retrograde, and I was generally being polite, mostly because I think astrology is a load of horse manure. Um, but it got me thinking. It's like, I don't think I've done a real thorough episode on psychic yet. I've talked about Nostradamus, who was a very overrated fraud, in my opinion. Who didn't, as much as he has his reputation, for being an amazing prophet, he got almost everything. He got pretty much everything wrong. Uh, Sorry, hold on. Was messaging one of my players for the Terror at the Table, which we just filmed the second episode of. We're still having problems with the first episode. Fortunately, the audio didn't come out so good. But we got a couple of cameras to film it this time. Hopefully, it'll look better. Anyway, psychic phenomenon. There are. Let me be clear before I start into a long tirade about how ridiculous I find most psychics. Um, I do believe that legitimate psychic phenomenon exists. There are actually a number of studies that bear this out. Let me see if I can find a few of them for you guys. But there are studies that have been done by psychologists. There are studies that have been done by physicists. Um, and I'm going to talk about at least some of the more well-known and interesting ones. But there are a couple of types of phenomenon that have generally been tested. The results aren't like, oh my gosh, spectacular. We're not talking about people who can definitely provably like bend spoons with psychic ability and things of that nature. We're talking, but remote viewing, the ability to see things at a distance, um, what they call distant mental influence, um, where attempts to heal from a distance. The Gons field tests, which are really fascinating, and I'm going to get into in a bit, and feeling the future, trying to predict the future. There's historically parapsychologists have also acknowledged the existence of what they call telekinesis, the ability to move objects. The evidence for which is fairly unreliable, particularly since one of the better known examples was, of course, um, famous psychic and spoonbender Uri Geller, whose psychic abilities have since been demonstrated to be acts of a magician. And the thing is, again, people there. It hasn't been absolutely proven by any means. There are a number of studies that certainly suggest something is going on outside of the statistical norm here. Um, but you're not going to get a psychic who's going to predict tomorrow's winning lottery numbers as much as they would like to. I would suggest reading Steve Volk's book, Fringeology. He talks a lot about a number of very solid studies that have been done, and works pretty hard to dispel the myth that parapsychology is a bad science and that these people are doing bad, designing poor tests. They're really not. Also, quite frankly, and I think now is a pretty good time to talk about this. Um, James Randi's test okay. One of the thing a lot of people in the paranormal community have been listening to for years is, well, if it's real, why don't you take James Randi's $1 million paranormal challenge? For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the paranormal challenge was an offer by a magician, not scientist, James the Amazing Randy, of $1 million to anyone who, under Randy's conditions, could produce repeatable psychic phenomenon. He claimed, he claimed the tests were straight. He claimed they worked on it together. In reality, you can do a little bit of research online and find he's been criticized even by other skeptics for the reality of the fact that the standards he held people to were unreasonable. He took advantage of the fact people didn't understand probability statistics well enough to properly design their own tests. I can say from personal experience that he would cheerfully just change testing protocols and not properly notify the person he was testing, because he did that to Lou. The guy, and here's the thing: the $1 million, as far as anyone has ever been able to tell, did exist, but it was set up in such a way he would never pay it out, and he had multiple financial reasons to never pay it out. On the one hand, there was the fact that the reality is that the JREF, James Randi Educational Foundation, was able, well, it couldn't touch the million for a while, and since has, and and we're going to get into that in a minute. But it could collect the rather large amounts of interest that we're accumulating on it. For another, Randy's made a career out of telling people psychic phenomenon doesn't exist. He's done numerous public speaking engagements insisting this was the case for decades. He'd lose what credibility he has coming out and saying he's been wrong. He's wrong. Skeptics will probably get annoyed with me for saying that, but it's the truth. The man has a vested financial interest, has always had a vested financial interest in saying it's not real. And the reality of it is here, because even if you disagree with me, and you believe the test was real, the key word here is was real. If you go to the website, which is randy.org, here I'll read you what it says. And this is from September 1st, 2015. Since James Randi's retirement earlier this year, the board has considered how to continue the fund without his direct involvement. The board has decided it will convert the foundation into a grant-making foundation. Starting in 2016, we will be making grants to nonprofit groups that we believe are promoting activities that encourage critical thinking and fact-based worldview. We expect to make a small number of grants each year, totaling approximately $100,000 per year. We will not accept suggestions, applications, or proposals for these grants. We hope they will come as a pleasant surprise to the recipients, just as Randy's MacArthur Foundation grant was a pleasant surprise to him. We will only be making grants in the future. We think it appropriate to stop accepting memberships and donations. Any donations received before December 31st, 2015 will be tax deductible. We plan on continuing the $1 Million Challenge as a means for educating the public on paranormal claims, but the process for consideration of claims has been changed effective September 1st, 2015. No applications submitted under previous procedures or relying on the whole in part on the published terms of the challenge will be considered. Over the years, we have spent a great deal of time dealing with claims ranging from yet another dowsing claim to some very eccentric and untestable claims. The overwhelming majority refused to fill out the application and even state a claim that can be tested. Some of them claimed to show up in person and demand to be tested. While they wait, we can no longer justify the resources to interact with these people. Immediately, JREF will no longer be accepting applications directly from people claiming to have a paranormal power. Previously available application forms shall not be used and will be rejected without any review of the contents. We anticipate providing minimum required protocols for preliminary tests early next year. No one should make any effort to pursue the challenge until the minimum required protocols are issued. The only exception is that any established psychic may contact JRF by email to be tested directly, preferably with an independent third-party TV crew. It has been a great 19 years, and we thank you for your interest and support. The Board of Directors, James Randi Educational Foundation, Chip Denman, and Rick Adams. So the next post here after that is on November 27th, 2015, which is advertising a free course in science-based medicine. There has been nothing else in well over a year now. There's no new testing protocols. There is nothing. There is no basis. Even if you believe, and I emphatically from first-hand experience do not, that the challenge was ever a legitimate thing, they're not accepting applications anymore. Modern psychics can apply. There's no new information. There's no new challenge. Give it a rest. If you go to on Randy, .org. If you go to About and you go to the $1 Million Challenge, it says the James Randi Educational Foundation's $1 Million Challenge has been terminated. And just links back to the thing that talks about a closing. There is no more $1 Million Challenge. There hasn't been in over a year. There's nobody who's going to ever claim that money because the money doesn't. I will acknowledge that the money existed at one time. It's been turned into a grant-making foundation. That's where the money is gone. It isn't there anymore. There's nobody that's testing these claims anymore. Let it go. Stop telling us to apply for something that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So all of that said, again, there are certainly some evidence of psychic phenomena, and one of the most common claims that skeptics make is that, well, if psychic phenomenon exists, we'd have to throw out our entire understanding of modern science and physics. That's not true. There are certainly theories in modern quantum physics that would account for many forms of psychic phenomenon. Cold reading, there's definitely evidence that what happens to a particle in one place can affect the particle in a completely different place, even with a considerable distance between them, which could account for things like remote viewing, where you can see something at a distance. The whole spooky at a distance thing. It could explain remote viewing. It could explain telepathy. Theories about the nature of time, and that time is the time is not actually as we perceive it, a continuum going from past to present to future, which may in fact be quite wrong. Time being a dimension, time being all happening at once, and it's just our brain separating it out into something we can understand. Would certainly again explain the ability to see the future. It's not that if the future exists in another dimension or something of that nature, it may be possible to see into it. Again, quantum physics could explain psychic phenomenon. Does this prove the existence of psychic phenomenon? No. My point is merely that the idea that to accept that these things exist means we have to completely reject science as we understand it is not a factual statement. The skeptic's response, because I've had this argument with them many times, is the quantum universe, the universe of the subatomic particles does not affect the wider universe. But we already know that's not true. And I'll give you a real simple example of something on the subatomic scale being able to affect something on our scale, which is photons. Particle, wave, whatever the bloody heck they are, because of course they can behave as both. It only takes a single photon for the human retina to respond. So yes, what happens on one end can affect the other. There's also they're saying no, it doesn't. But even setting aside the example of the photon, there's also the reality that how on earth do you know? You're arbitrarily saying that the two don't relate in that way, and that the rules of one don't apply to the other. You may simply be wrong, and if you're wrong, then yes, we already have the mechanisms in place in science to explain the phenomenon without we'd have to expand our understanding of things a little and accept that what we know applies in a wider sense, but that's not the same as saying everything we know is wrong. It's we need to expand what we understand to be true. All of that said, there are a great many supposed psychics out there that are full of horse manure. Most of whom rely on essentially what qualifies as magic tricks. Um, Now, people who claim to be able, for the most part, people who claim to be able to move objects with their mind rely on sleight of hand. Case in point, Uri Geller has been pretty conclusively shown, and since has admitted, and then denied, and then admitted, and he waffles back and forth. But for the most part, it's confirmed that what he was doing was, and always has been a magic trick. Um, and magicians have been. It's not a great shock. Magicians have been faking magical powers since there have been magicians. Kind of why we call them magicians. Um, the other, but there's a lot of things that go into sleight of hand, and it's a fairly complicated subject. That it would be logically impossible to explain without demonstration, and I'm not really set up to do demonstrations, or am I inclined to, since as a magician I'm generally a believer in the magician's code of you don't reveal how tricks are done. If you really want to know, you can research sleight of hand on the internet quite easily and find videos right here on YouTube showing you how a bunch of things are done. But there are two other concepts I want to talk about, which are what's called the Forer effect, or sometimes the Barnum effect, and cold reading. Let me give you an example of the Barnum effect, or the Forer effect. You have a need for other people to like and admire you, and yet you tend to be critical of yourself. While you have some personality weaknesses, you are generally able to compensate for them. You have considerable unused capacity that you have not turned to your advantage. Disciplined and self-controlled on the outside, you tend to be worrisome and insecure on the inside. At times you have numerous doubts as to whether you have made the right decision or done the right thing. You prefer a certain amount of change and variety and become dissatisfied when hemmed in by restrictions and limitations. You also pride yourself as an independent thinker and do not accept others' statements without satisfactory proof, but you have found it unwise to be too frank in revealing yourself to others. At times you are extroverted, affable, and sociable, while at other times you are introverted, wary, and reserved. Some of your aspirations tend to be rather unrealistic. Now, if you think honestly about the statement I just read, you'll probably think it sounds like it applies to you. Variations of this have been done to do various tests. Like, for example, Forer himself gave his students a personality test, completely ignored their answers, and gave every student exactly what I just read as their evaluation. And he asked them to rate it from 0 to 5, 5 meaning he felt that it was an excellent assessment, 4 being the assessment was good. The class evaluation average was 4.26. It's been done hundreds of times with psychology students, and the average is still around 4.2 out of 5, or about. I'll get to that or about 84%. So Lord Ruin asked me, have Lou and I ever dealt with crazy fortune tellers, astrologers, and psychics? I want to get a little more into this concept, but I will come back to that question because it's a good question. So the thing to realize is the Barnum effect works, or this part of the Barnum effect works. There's more to it that I'll get back to in a second, for a couple of reasons. One, it tells you things you want to believe. It says, you think you pride yourself on being an independent thinker, and that you do not accept other people's statements without some sort of proof. Most of us probably at least want to see ourselves that way. Most of us would consider, see ourselves as having all sorts of potential that never gets used. We see ourselves as being too, a lot of us are too critical about ourselves. We at least want, whether it's true or not, to think that a lot of people like and admire us. So half of this situation is it tells you a bunch of things you want to hear. The other half of the situation is if you listen to it again, and as well as telling you one thing, it then turns around and tells you the exact opposite is true. Now, you need other people to like and admire you, yet you tend to be critical of yourself. You know, you have personality weaknesses, but you usually make up for those. Um, Now you like change of variety. You know, you have doubts about whether you make. It's a very common effect, and you see astrologers, you see card readers, you see a lot of people who claim to have psychic powers use these sorts of statements. Um, and particularly the positive and negative back to back is a very common and easy technique to use, because if you do it just right, people are going to um, respond to one way or the other. If they don't respond to the positive, and they often will, just because of the fact people want to think better themselves, they'll respond to the negative. It's like, well, I don't think, you know, maybe I don't think maybe I don't really want people to like and admire me, but I tend to be very critical of myself. So maybe I do want, yeah, I got some personality quirks and problems, but I can usually have it under control. You're telling people what they want to hear. Um, a side effect to which is you give people a little bit of information, and they'll usually fill in the blanks. Let me give you a good example. Um, a really good example of this point is something you've seen John Edwards and Sylvia Browne when she was still alive, and James Van Praagh and the other ones all use constantly, which is to either, who's Mary? And so if you're dealing with an audience of about 30 people, somebody knows a Mary. Ideally, somebody knows a Mary who's died recently. If they don't, they still know a Mary and know, well, somebody else knows is talking about this living Mary. It's an easy, but what you'll get, which is a kicker, is who's Mary, and the person you're talking to will go, oh, that's my mother's name. Now, because of the way human psychology works, after the fact, they're going to remember, well, the psychic told me my mother's name was Mary. No, they didn't. They told you that. They asked you who Mary was. They just threw it out there. And you told them that was your mother's name. This also relates to another important concept, which is called cold reading. Before I get into cold reading, let me address Rowan's question about if Lou and I ever had to put up with fakes, with nutty fortune tellers, astrologers, and psychics. Yes. I haven't had to deal with them on cases very often. I know Lou had a couple of experiences with new age frou-frou nut jobs. Usually people who were convinced their house was haunted by weird spirit phenomena. And when I say weird, I mean koala bears in army helmets. I kid you not. Wouldn't accept no for an answer, even though there was nothing paranormal going on. It was just their overactive imaginations. But one time we dealt with nut job psychics all of the time. And I mean all of the time, was when we did the radio show. Because we had plenty of people that claimed to be psychic on. And most of the psychics I've spoken with over the years fall into one of three categories. And the vast majority of them fall into the first two. The first group are people who are full of BS and know they're full of BS. which are ones consciously using things like the Forer effect and cold reading, which I'm about to get into. Um, the second group is full of BS, but doesn't realize it. They honestly think they have some sort of magic power, or psychic power, if you prefer. Um, most of whom are, in fact, still using the Barnum effect or cold reading. They just don't realize they're doing it. I mean, oh yes, the lady who thought she could talk to aliens, which is another good example I'll have to get into, which is using unverifiable information. Um, it, it's the kicker of this whole thing, but um, it's people that have a pretty good understanding of human nature and psychology, even an instinctive one, not a a formally trained one, often can do cold reading and can do the Barnum effect without being consciously aware of what they're doing. Um, so the person can honestly think they have some psychic gift, and they're actually relying on psychological and clues that have nothing to do with the paranormal. It's not super. There is of course the third and final group, which yes are people who actually have an legitimate ability, and I've met people like that as well. They're the least common of the three in my experience. Um, I think it's often said, and I think it's true, that most people have a little bit of an ability. But there's a world of difference between having a little bit of an ability and having anything that's actually practically useful. Um, and that's really what I'm talking about. Okay, what's a blue moon when the phone rings so you know who's calling? Um, as opposed to use Jay Leno's favorite example, can you predict tomorrow's lottery numbers or any other reliable type of thing? Um, um, yeah, the reality here is not the case. Majority of these people have no psychic ability. They just think they either know they don't, or they just think they do. You find people who think they do are particularly common, at least in my personal experience, with card readers, astrologers. Because if you look at the instruction, with respect to my friends who do tarot, if you look at the instructions for tarot card readings and the meanings of various different cards, yeah, it a lot of it falls into the Barnum effect. A lot of it is also vague enough to make relatively easy to apply to different people. And I know a number of people who use tarot cards either as a gag or for various psychological means that don't believe it works, but can still give a pretty accurate sounding reading just by having a bit of understanding of human nature and what people want to hear. Um, Again, I hesitate to dismiss the entirety of tarot card readings, but a lot of the time I'm a reasonably skeptical person about it. Um, there's plenty of reasons to question whether or not this is actually paranormal, and that's okay. I mean, there are other ways that people can and do use those cards that don't depend on paranormal phenomenon. But let's talk a little bit about cold reading. Um, Cold reading is the other major popular tactic that psychics use, um, which could be honestly could be called educated guessing. Um, Cold reading relies on statistical probability and generality, things that apply to lots of people, and then paying attention to the words, body language, skin color, breathing patterns, dilation, contraction of the pupils of the eye, and other physiological clues in a person's reaction. If you pay attention, you understand a bit of how to read body language. People will give you all sorts of useful information. Not to mention, quite a few people will just open their mouths and tell you what you want to hear. Um, but let me give you an example of my point. I don't have a huge following at the moment, but with luck, in a couple of months, about 20 to 30 people will probably have seen this video. Now, if I asked right now that everybody who sees this video, either now or in the future, put a comment in the comment section below and tell me, have you had a male relative who's died recently who was suffering chest pain? Most people could probably, I would probably get a bunch of people that say yes. Why? Because if you're dealing with people in their 20s and 30s, one, heart attacks are very common. It's one of the leading causes of death in men in the United States. Two, you'll notice I didn't say heart attack, I said chest pain. If they didn't have a heart attack, I could probably find something that fits chest pain. Maybe they just had a really bad case of indigestion, for example. I only said chest pain. I didn't say a heart attack. I can let you fill in the maybe they got shot in the chest, stabbed in the chest. I bet they felt chest pain. I let you fill in the information instead of just telling you. Another common technique that'll go here is they sometimes call the shotgun method, which is when you throw out two pieces of information very quickly. Usually when you read, you throw out the first piece, you read the person, you realize it's not clicking, so you quick throw out another piece of information. After establishing through other methods that, okay, I'm claiming I talked to your mother. Well, she's very, very talkative. Yeah, baby. Which I get for her is not really normal. Well, okay, I was about to be wrong, because you're going... So I just turned it around. Oh, well, she's not normally talkative, but she's talkative this time. And there are lots of other techniques like that you can use to convince somebody that you have a psychic ability just by understanding how to read them. It's knowing how the mind works. It's understanding statistical probabilities. You don't have to be that vague, because there's lots of things. Well, there's another technique that goes right along with this that was particularly common in the early 20th century, late 19th century, which actually they call hot reading. It's easy to catch somebody by guessing generalities. It's even easier if you hire a private investigator or have your husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever do a little bit of digging. Follow the person around. Or another common example here would be one that was commonly used by various so-called faith healers. Peter, there was the one, and let me look up, because I don't want to offend somebody by using the wrong name, although I'm pretty sure I remember it is. Okay, so double check. One moment. Yeah, this is the one. So Peter Popov, very popular supposed faith healer, born who rose in prominence in 1980s, conducted revival meetings, had a nationally televised program during which he performed miraculous cures on audience members. And he'd actually just like pick people out of the audience, call them by name, know the doctor, know why they were there, what they needed to be healed from. And it was quite remarkable. You could find video footage of this online. How specific he could be. What they found is before every, James Randi, and he's documented this pretty well, so I'll give Randi credit for this. Brought together a team of people to investigate Popov and other people who were claiming to be psychics. And they went to the meetings. And they noticed at the beginning of every meeting, Popov's people had everyone fill out prayer cards. The prayer cards would have their name, address, doctor's name, and whatever they were there to be healed for. So this is where this gets twisted, because they had an engineer working with them who did a little bit of work and figured out exactly what was going on. So Popov's people would take these cards backstage to his wife, who had electronic transmission thing set up that would be broadcasting this information to an earpiece Popov was wearing, which allowed him to have all of this remarkable information. And the kicker is, with a computerized radio scanner, a crime scene analyst and electronics expert by the name of Alexander Jason was able to essentially hack the broadcast and record it, and prove what was going on. In fact, Randi exposed Popov on the Tonight Show back when Johnny Carson was still at the helm. Popov tried to deny the allegation, saying he had hired an actress to impersonate his wife on a doctored videotape. He then would eventually admit to the existence of the radio device, claiming that his wife only occasionally gave him the name of the person in need of special prayers. He also claimed that almost everybody knew about the wireless communication system, and unsurprisingly, after the admission, and for that matter, after the Carson airing, his donations, his viewer ratings dropped pretty significantly, and then in 1987, he declared bankruptcy, listing more than 790 unpaid creditors. Now, in fairness, his attorney, William Simon, attributed the collapse of his ministry to financial mismanagement more than the disclosure was about Popov. The video footage would also be shown on Nova's Secrets on the Psychics in 1991. Also been released on video. He got caught red-handed. There's really no way around it. What's sad is people still took him seriously. They declined. They didn't reach zero. But it isn't. And there's similar examples that have been used with the prayer cards. Some televangelists have excellent memories and make use of mnemonic devices. You meet somebody before the show, you talk to it, and you'll see psychics use the exact same trick, where they'll circulate among the audience, or they'll just simply, if you're recording, you just record the audience in advance, and then use that information later. It's very common, for example, for psychics to have their friends or employees circulate among the audience and talk to people. Hey, how you doing? Well, welcome to the show. Why are you? So who are you trying to reach today? Sometimes those people will be upfront, and other times those people, quite honestly, just blend in and not tell people they work for the psychic in question or that they're friends with the psychic in question. And it works pretty darn well, is the reality. There's a reason that these people make so much money. And the kicker is, nothing we're talking about is new. People have been pulling these stunts for hundreds of years. And let's be clear, people who fall for this kind of thing aren't stupid. Um, it's a common mistake to think that saying that, oh, you actually believe that you fell for it. How gullible are you? That's not the case. That's not what's going on. Another aspect of the reason that these tricks work is we seem to be built with the desire to believe, um, which is very strong. And there's arguments about it being an evolutionary advantage and things like that, particularly relating to the nature of religious belief. Um, the main evolutionary argument I've seen is, and I think it applies pretty well to mediums and the idea talking to the dead, it is once you reach the level of self awareness that people are at, you have to inevitably grapple with the reality of the fact that one day you're going to die. Materialistic explanations often are simply not enough for people. Some people it is, and I'm not disrespecting any atheists who choose to watch this by saying this. Nor am I by any means disrespecting religious people by saying they're stupid or weak. But there is certainly a reality that should be acknowledged that an inherently materialistic worldview doesn't necessarily help you cope with the fact that someday you're going to die. If you don't believe in any sort of spiritual life, that's it. You're not coming back. There's no hereafter. You are simply going to cease to exist. You will only be a memory in people who knew you. And if you're lucky, maybe some books and YouTube videos. And people have a very hard time with that now. I don't agree with the typical atheist explanation of, well, this discounts religion because it's just born of this people's need to believe. Nor am I even arguing that discounts all psychics or discounts spirits or things of that nature. But it certainly explains, I think, why so many people are inclined to believe psychics, are inclined to believe mediums, even why otherwise extremely intelligent people are fooled. And the fact is that intelligent people have been fooled by psychics many, many times. The penultimate, the number of people Yuri Geller fooled by doing magic tricks is pretty high. Which is partly the fact that this inherent desire to believe, and partly the fact that a lot of the people just didn't understand the principles of magic. But an even better example that would be Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was not a stupid man. He was a medical doctor. He was an excellent writer. He was an former army doctor. He had traveled the world. He had done many remarkable things. He was highly educated, very and his friends, even Houdini himself, who disagree with Doyle vehemently on the legitimacy of mediums, he's very clear in his Houdini's very clear in his book that he's not claiming that Doyle's a stupid man, but he's a smart man who's been fooled. And I think a large part of why smart people get fooled by psychics is that there's an inherent desire to believe, which goes back to, even for religious people, when you believe there is a hereafter, it's most of us find it extremely, and let's be honest, this desire probably has something to do with why shows like mine are popular. But there is this inherent desire for proof. You want some reassurance that your belief is correct. And the problem is that there are con artists and predators out there who take advantage of that desire. So the question, I guess, then becomes, how do you guard yourself from phonies? I'd love to be able to tell you that understanding everything we've been talking about, understanding cold reading and the Barnum effect will gird you against these people and you're not going to fall for it. The reality is it's not. somebody who's really good at the techniques we're talking about can be very difficult to catch. Especially because somebody who's very, very good at the techniques we're talking about may not even realize they're using the techniques that we're talking about. They may be doing it on a subconscious level, and it's much harder to catch them in a lie when they don't understand that it's a lie. It's very hard to verify entirely without objectively testing. And there are ways to do that, and I'll get to a particular very promising type of test that's been done over the years called the Onsfield effect in a moment. I'm getting there. There's a madness to the method and a method to the madness. But the best things you can do is just be on your guard. Answer, if you ever go to a psychic, my strongest advice in the strongest possible terms is restrict any answers you give to questions to yes or no as much as possible. We have a natural tendency, and psychics, the phonies and the con men, take advantage of this. And it's not just psychic con men; it's all types of con men use these techniques, as do magicians for that matter. But we have a tendency to overshare and to give more information than is necessary. And you've got to resist that and just stick to yes, no, or just answer in as few words as possible. Another trick I've used myself that I find very useful is bring a piece of paper with you and keep a running count on the piece of paper or on a tablet or on something of how many times they're right and how many times they're wrong. Because another reality of human psychology is no matter how good you think you are, wish fulfillment and similar problems means that you're not going to remember what happened accurately. The reality is that any police officer can tell you, police officers can tell you this, psychologists can tell you this. Memory is an incredibly unreliable thing. Particularly where things of belief and preconceived notions are concerned. Our natural tendency is to remember the times they get it right and forget the times they get it wrong. You'll watch people who attend a live reading and go, wow, he was really on target. You show a video of it to them a week or two later and they go, wow, he got nothing right. Which leads to another technique that these guys, two other techniques before we get into the Onsfield effect, and we talk about some of the ways of testing psychic phenomenon that have been developed over the years. One technique that's used by television psychics constantly is called the very simple method of video editing. If you look into the paperwork for Edwards and the other famous TV psychics, generally speaking, they're videotaping for 2 hours or more. And then that's being edited down to a half an hour segment. It's very easy to look good when they edit out your mistakes and they deceptively edit things so, when early in the episode, you ask, is your mother's name Mary? And then you come back later and you just edit it into, your mother's name is Mary, or I'm speaking to Mary. And when you don't see him asking, or the point when the person outright told them that information, oh my gosh, he knew her mother's name is Mary. No, he didn't. They told him. They just edited it out. Another trick that Lord Ruin was commenting on, we had a lady on the show that claimed to be psychic, who specifically claimed to talk to aliens on the planet Nibiru called Zetas. She used a technique that was also very popular in the 19th century and the early 20th century. With the advancement in our technology, I think it's become less popular, though clearly it still happens, which is give them unverifiable information. Especially if we're talking about the 1800s And you're saying you're going on a psychic journey to Jupiter and going underneath the clouds and seeing what's down there? Yeah, we hadn't invented satellites for or probes for what about 100 years yet? Um, or psychics have talked about the surface of Mars, the surface of Venus, and the various life forms living there. When our telescopes weren't as powerful as they are today, we didn't know that much about the surface of those planets. Who, who's gonna say they're wrong? You can't test it. Um, another one you'll see, particularly Sylvia Brown did this in many of her books. Just talking about what it's like in heaven, talking about what it's like in the afterlife, in the spirit world. I realize what I'm saying about religion in general, but it's like, okay, that's not verifiable information either. Well, you go to other psychics and see what they say and see if it matches up, and often it doesn't. But again, some of the claims that have been made are very bizarre. Sylvia Brown, honestly, at one point claimed that heaven was literally 3 feet above the physical world, um, which is really strange. I don't even know where to go with that one. We're talking about Christmas in heaven and talking about all these other weird things. We're talking about things that happened back before the beginning of recording history, and it's like, well, okay, it's before the beginning of recorded history. How do we verify that? And some of these people may be real, some of these people may be legitimate. I honestly don't know. You don't know. It's hard to verify these things, and sometimes in the fullness of time, as technology develops, we do prove them wrong. One moment, let me look something up. Because I want to talk about a very interesting concept that was as long since fallen out of popular thought, but theosophy, which is essentially more or less the early New Age movement, although it still exists on its own. But there's a concept in theosophy that was very popular once upon a time called occult chemistry, which was using psychic ability and magic and things of that nature, and yogis and things of that nature, to envision incredibly small objects and to look at this atomic structure of things. Um, there's a pair of them in particular, um, who predicted a bunch of um, hold on, I'm trying to find. But anyway, there's all these strange claims, and I'm trying to find the name of the scientist in question. Because there's actually, ironically enough, these ideas directly inspired a Nobel Prize-winning chemist to make a number of important discoveries in terms of isotopes. And in fact, just so we can't say, oh, this didn't really happen, oh, this is wishful thinking, etc., etc., etc. He actually directly credited occult chemistry in his Nobel acceptance speech. Still trying to get the name. Oh, but And again, I'm not. It's certainly not an argument that theosophy in general is correct, but it is a relatively interesting example of something supposedly psychic that actually was objectively demonstrated. Oh, dang it. Here we go. Okay, Francis Ashton, the inventor of the mass spectrograph and winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, physics on chemistry, um, discovered a number of isotopes after the ideas suggested by theosophists who practiced occult chemistry, supposedly allowing them to see molecules with clairvoyance. He even credited them in his Nobel speech. To give a few other examples, Hans Berger, the man whose work eventually led to the creation of the EEG, started his investigation because his sister had a weird feeling the day that he was thrown from his horse. Um, but despite what at least some skeptics have claimed over the years, there is a case, well, we haven't objectively proven the existence of psychic phenomenon. There are documented instances where an exploration of these claims have produced useful results. Um, so let's talk a little bit about and I think I've been thinking about this. I think I might wind up cutting the shows down when I'm not having a guest on, or at least until I find a co-host, because I'm finding it a little difficult sometimes to sustain a 2-hour discussion by myself. Um, at least in this format, the classes will be a little different for those of you who are intending to come. Um, Also, for the classes, I'll have people in front of me to talk to, which makes and ask questions, things of that nature, which makes it easier. It's hard to do this without anything to respond. At least I find it hard to do this without anybody to respond to. But I want to talk about a couple of methods that have been used over the years to test psychic ability, and the one I find the most interesting personally. So one of the most common methods, which was developed by J.B. Rhine. J.B. Rhine is in many ways the father of parapsychology. He was one of the first people to try to objectively test these things in the lab, and he developed, his institute developed what's known as a Zenier telepathy test. For those of you who are wondering, a Zenier telepathy test involves 25 cards with each with one of 5 symbols on them: circle, cross, 3 wavy lines, star, and circle, cross, square. One person holds it up, the other person tries to see what the other person is seeing, or read what the person's thinking about. And they've gotten some pretty interesting results. For those of you that are thinking it, why, yes, this is what you see Peter Venkman doing at the beginning of the movie Ghostbusters. It's got a bunch of problems. But another one that's very interesting is what's called the Gansfield effect. Gansfield being German for complete field, or perceptual deprivations. This idea that by creating a state of sensory deprivation, usually you have the person floating in a dark tank of water with halved golf balls over their eyes, with a dim red light shining, and headphones with white noise being pumped into them. But you do this, and usually what you would have is a computer in another room showing various images, and it would be cycling through images, and one of them would be the target, and the person's trying to hit on what the target is. It's a fairly interesting test. One of the problems that skeptics have brought up with it is that they don't always use a properly soundproof room, so it's possible that when they're using videos as opposed to still images, the person could have heard it, giving them clues. So other issues have been raised with proper randomization. But it has actually, 2010, Lance Storm, Patrizio Tresoldi, and Lorenzo Di Risco analyzed 29 Gans field experiments from 1997 to 2008. Out of 1,498 trials, 483 produced hits, corresponding to a hit rate of 32.2%. 32.2% doesn't sound like a whole lot, maybe, but statistically speaking, it is actually pretty significant. Um, Participants selected for personality traits and characterizations through psychoduct, um, thought to be, psychoductive, were found to perform better than unselected people on the experiments. Um, and there's still a lot of debate on this and how reliable it is. And it's a thing, most of the evidence that has come out suggesting there's something to psychic ability isn't individual studies so much as studies of metadata where they've looked at a bunch of different studies and looked for correlations and looked for other evidence that something is going on. But again, those kinds of studies have suggested there is certainly something here. I'd love to be able to say yes, psychic phenomenon is a proven fact. The reality is it's not. There's certainly evidence to suggest that it may be, that there is something going on to a degree, and that it's worth. I would consider it a field worth pursuing, because again, while I can't honestly come forward and say, oh well, will one day absolutely prove psychic phenomenon. I don't know that for sure. The study, as I think the story of Francis, and Ashton, and Hans Berger, and other stories like those demonstrate, the study itself can produce valuable results, even if it isn't the results the person's looking for. Another really good example of this, and let me look up the specifics again, because it's it's a pretty funny story. Okay, so 1967, a radio signal was detected using the interplanetary scintillation array of the Mullard Radio Astronomy Observatory in Cambridge, England, by Jocelyn Bell and Anthony Hewish. The signal had a 1.3373020883331 per second period, and a 0.04 second pulse width. It originated, specific space and place in space. It was detected by individual observation, the miles of graphical data traces. Due to the almost perfect regularity, they first assumed it was regular, spurious noise, but that was promptly discarded. After what the discoverers proposed an alternative explanation, the signal might be a beacon or communication from an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization that was actually, I kid you not, designated LGM-1, LGM standing for Little Green Men. It actually wound up being radio emissions from the pulsar we know as CP1919, which was the first one recognized as such. Other scientists could have discovered pulsars before Bell, but their observations were either ignored or disregarded. Researchers Thomas Gold and Sir Francis Hoyle identified this astronomical object as a rapidly rotating neutron star immediately upon their announcement. Before the nature of the signal was determined, the researchers Bell, under PhD supervisor Anthony Hewis, somewhat seriously considered the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Um, so, so when when the first evidence of a pulsar was found, the original thought people had, because of the consistency of the radio broadcast, because of the nature of pulsars, was that, oh my gosh, we found it might be aliens. Um, and out of that mistake came a fairly important astronomical discovery. Um, we know that Alexander Graham Bell, the man who invented the telephone, was also attempting to create a device to speak with the dead. Nikola Tesla, aside from being a genius inventor who designed the Tesla coil and alternating current and a ton of other useful practical devices that we use today, he also was often a quest to be able to beam energy through the atmosphere and do other things he simply, as far as we know, wasn't able to do. Um, some Just because the subject seems absurd does not always mean that the result it cannot produce useful results. As I have previously stated, though, I do think I'm going to cut the show down to for an hour. For the time being, I really need a co-host or a guest. It's just very difficult to sustain. I'm finding it difficult, at least, to sustain 2 hour shows at this time, just by myself. I need somebody to bounce ideas off. Um, I am still looking if anybody else out there is interested in taking a shot at one shots. Hopefully Drew will be available soonish. I don't know. I need to talk to him and see. But otherwise, I'm gonna say that's gonna do it for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. It's been a lot of fun. We will be back next week on Tuesday. Um, Topic to be decided. The Terror at the Table is coming. I promise. I know I keep saying that. Again, the first episode has really caused us no end of headaches, which is a pity because it was a really good session. Just the audio just didn't work out very well for us. We've got the second one, which is Vampire the Masquerade. Um, for those old school gamers out there, it went pretty well. We filmed it last night. We're going to be editing and working on it in the near future. In 2 weeks, we will be filming an adventure I wrote myself, which is actually all 3 so far adventures I wrote myself, called Every Town Has Its Secret, which will be a adventure for the game East Texas University. Will remember that we had one of the writers on from that. It was a really good interview. You can go back and check that out if you would like. But otherwise, that's it for tonight. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And please remember, if you did enjoy what I brought to you, like, comment, subscribe, and share. It really does help the channel out. Otherwise, have a good night, everyone.